Hello guys, welcome to my channel. So today we are starting with carbohydrates. As you know, we discussed as in the last video, as I mentioned, we'll continue with the enzyme, but it is like a brief and like a very complex topic that has so much of chemistry in it. So we'll go slowly with the enzyme, but the main part of the protein that has been completed, right? That's only the enzyme that is left, right? So we'll go slowly with that, and now we'll start with the carbohydrates. Right. So carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the most abundant biomolecules on the earth, right? And each year, photosynthesis converts more than 100 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide and H2O into the cellulose and other plant products as well. Like the functions of carbohydrates are like certain carbohydrates like sugar and starch are the dietary staple in most part of the world, right? And the oxidation of carbohydrates is the central energy yielding pathway in most of the non-photosynthetic cells, right? So what it is, right? So the oxidation of carbohydrates is the central in the is energy yielding pathway in most non-photosynthetic cells. So the oxidation of the carbohydrate, that is the most important thing. So that helps in the energy, all right, central energy yielding pathway in the most non-photosynthetic cells, right? There are carbohydrate polymers as well that are called glycans, right? Carbohydrate polymers that are called glycans, right? That serve as a structure and protective elements in the cell walls of bacteria and plants and in the connective tissues of animal, right? So the function of this is what it does, it's help as a structural and the protective element. The protective element in the cell wall of bacteria and plants and and in the connective tissue of the animals, right? So this is the function of, right? So this is the function of carbohydrate polymers, right? So the main what the oxidation of carbohydrates help in the central energy yielding pathways. Like there are carbohydrate polymers that are called glycans that help the structural and protective element in the cell wall of the plants and bacteria and in the connective tissue of animals. And other carbohydrate polymers lubricate, like there are other carbohydrate polymers as well that helps in lubricate skeletal joints and participate in cell to cell recognition and adhesion, right? So there are other carbohydrate polymers lubricate skeletal joints, skeletal joints, and it also participate in cell to cell recognition and addition. That's another function of carbohydrate polymer. There are other carbohydrate polymers as well, and there are complex carbohydrate polymers as well. So what it does, it covalently attach to the proteins or lipids and act as a signals that determine the intracellular destination or metabolic fate of these hybrid molecules that are called glycoconjugates. Right? So, alright, so I'll write that down as well. So complex carbohydrate. So there are complex carbohydrate polymers. What it does, it covalently attach to proteins or that act as signals, right? So that determines the intracellular destination, or the metabolic fate. Metabolic fate of called glycoconjugates, right? So these are some of the functions of carbohydrates. Right, so carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones or substances that yield such compounds on hydrolysis. So what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones or such substance. What kind of substance it? Such substance that yields such compounds on hydrolysis. So this is. So what does this mean? So if you don't know what is polyhydroxyaldehydes, so this is like the very basic thing, but I will still let you know what is polyhydroxyaldehyde means. Polyhydroxyaldehyde. Right, so the polyhydroxyaldehyde or the ketones, or you can say ketones, are ketones. So what it is, these are molecules. These are molecules with, so these are molecules with more than one, what it has, more than one hydroxyl group, right? So this hydroxyl group is represented as this, correct? And it also has a carbonyl group, and the carbonyl group is represented as like this, right? Carbon and the oxygen, correct? This, either the carbonyl group either at the terminal carbon atom at the end or at the second carbon atom. Second carbon atom, and that if it's on the second carbon atom, it is known as ketones, and if this is as a terminal carbon atom, like this is a terminal carbon atom, it is known as aldose, right? And these are called carbohydrates. Right, so this is what are carbohydrates. They are polyhydroxyaldehydes, right? And what is polyhydroxyaldehyde? So they are the molecules with more than one hydroxyl group and a carbonyl group either at the terminal end or at the second carbon atom are called aldose. I will show you the formula. so you will get a clear picture. So it represents something like this. All right, so this, the what I draw, I wrote here the chemical formula. So what is it from this definition? These are the molecules with more than one hydroxyl group, right? It has two hydroxyl group and a carbonyl group either at the terminal carbon atom. So where it is at the terminal carbon atom. So that means this is an aldose, right? And what is the ketose? All right, and in this you can see the carbonyl, right? The carbonyl group is at the second carbon atom, and that is how it is ketose, right? So this is carbohydrates and this is aldehyde, aldose, and this is ketose, right? So there's simple chemical formulas, right? So that was the definition of carbohydrates, and carbohydrate have an empirical formula. What's the formula? It is CH2O N, right? So this formula, empirical formula, is not applied to all the carbohydrates. Some also contains. Why? Because some carbohydrates also contain nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur. Some carbohydrate contains nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur as well. All right. So there are three major size classes of carbohydrates. Three. So we'll remove from the top. So there are three major classes, right, of the carbohydrates. So what are the three classes? Number one is monosaccharide, right? Number two is oligosaccharide, and three is polysaccharides. Right, so there are three major classes of carbohydrates: monosaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. So the word saccharide is derived from the Greek saccharon, means sugar. And so we'll remove some of this here. All right, so the monosaccharides, simple sugar, consist of single polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketone unit. Right, single. It contains only a single polyhydroxy or, right, so I'll write it down here. Known as simple sugar. So this simple sugar consists of only single polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketone unit, right? So this is monosaccharide. The most abundant monosaccharide in nature is a 6-carbon sugar, that is D-glucose, sometimes referred to as a dextrose as well, right? And monosaccharides of 4 or more carbon tend to have a cyclic structure, right? So the most abundant Monosaccharide is abundant monosaccharide is D-glucose. Alright, so the D-glucose. Why D? If you have saw the previous video, I'm not going deep into this why it's D-glucose. So you can see the previous video, but I will just mention it. Like it's because depending on the position of the hydroxyl group, it may either be a D as a dextro, or there can be an L, that is levo, right? So this means that D designate when it rotates the plane polarized light in the clockwise direction, and the L, if it's instead of L there is D, it rotates the plane polarized light in a counterclockwise direction. Alright, so these are the stereoisomers that represent the D and the L. Alright, D-glucose, and it was also known as sometimes or referred as dextrose as well. Right? So monosaccharide of 4 or more carbons tend to have a cyclic structure, like it has 2, right now you can see. But if monosaccharide has 4 or more carbon atoms, it tend to have a cyclic structure. All right. Oligosaccharide consists of a short chains of monosaccharide units or residues joined by characteristic linkage called glycosidic bonds. Right. The second one is oligosaccharide. So what are oligosaccharide? That are consist of short chains of monosaccharides units, or you can say residue, right? And they are joined by characteristic linkage called as glycosidic bond, like peptide bond for the proteins. This is for glycosidic bonds for the carbohydrates, right? And the most abundant oligosaccharides are the disaccharide with 2 monosaccharides unit. That is sucrose. The cane sugar, for example, consists of 6 carbon sugar. It has D-glucose and D-fructose, right? And all common monosaccharides and disaccharides have name ending with the suffix OSC. So in cells, most oligosaccharides consist of 3 or more units, do not occur as a free entities, but are joined to a non-sugar molecule, lipid or protein. So that's why they are, as we studied, glycoconjugates, right? And the polysaccharides, right, are the sugar polymers containing more than 20 or so monosaccharides. This is more than 2, right? Polysaccharides more than 20 or monosaccharides units. Some have hundreds or thousands of units as well. So that's why it's called as polysaccharides. Some polysaccharides such as cellulose and are linear chains. Others such as glycogen are branched. Both cellulose and glycogen consist of recurring units of D-glucose, but they differ in the type of glycosidic linkage and consequently have slightly different properties and biological roles. Alright, so this was just an introduction to monosaccharide, oligosaccharide, polysaccharide. We'll go in details in the next video. Just an introduction for the carbohydrates. Alright, thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to subscribe the channel. Thank you.